Digitalisierung,
la protection environnementale,
Europas Zukunft,
Migration,
la souveraineté européenne,
Wirtschaft.
Nous sommes d'accord, l'Europe est face à de nombreux défis. Pour obtenir des résultats, il est essentiel de communiquer ouvertement et d'être à l'écoute. Pour cela, nous avons créé une plateforme, le dialogue franco-allemand.
Diese Gesprächsreihe flankiert die Vorhaben des Vertrags von Aachen und soll den Zusammenhalt stärken. Das ist uns wichtig, denn wir an der Hertie School setzen uns ein für Multilateralismus und Kooperation.
Ce qui fait la force et la spécificité de la relation franco-allemande, c'est le fait qu'elle repose sur un dialogue quotidien qui porte sur tous les sujets.
Der souveräne Nationalstaat darf nicht verschwinden, aber wir dürfen Europa auch nicht verschwinden lassen. Gemeinsam müssen wir die Probleme lösen, nicht durch eine Abschottung von Europa und von der offenen Gesellschaft.
Die deutsch-französischen Zukunftsgespräche sind eine Eventreihe mit 3 Formaten. Beim Sicherheitsforum geht es um Kooperation in der Außen- und Sicherheitspolitik. Bei Wissenschaft trifft Politik schaffen wir Synergien und verknüpfen Wissen. Und die zweitägigen Pariser Platzgespräche bieten den Rahmen für intensiven inhaltlichen Austausch. Auch mit Ihnen. Wir freuen uns, wenn Sie dabei sind.
Ja, herzlich willkommen zu unserem Forum Wissenschaft.
Welcome to this forum, Science Meet Politics of the Pariser Platz Dialogue. It's about European sovereignty in a new era. I'm thrilled to be able to welcome so many participants here in spite of the temperatures and in spite of the growing infection numbers. My name is Anke Hassel. I'm the director of the Jacques Delors Center. Wissenschaft, Science Meets Politics is taking place for the 3rd time, and it was established by Hendrik Enderlein after the Aachen Treaty. Its objectives are coordinated action in security and defense policy in Europe. It's also about a close exchange in order to prepare positions in Germany and France, and we want to make a contribution in this forum. Scientists and policymakers are engaging in an exchange. We would like to thank the Federal Foreign Office for its financial supply, but also for institutional support, especially by our partner, University Sciences Po, and by Matthias Wichra, who will talk later, and also Marie Mondra. This is a very topical point in time. I would like to mention a few buzzwords which we are aware of. We have 2 important elections. Germany had a general election last September. A new coalition treaty was agreed. It's also about strategic sovereignty in Europe, but also there were general elections in France. We have a difficult situation there. It makes it difficult to put European policy plans by Mr. Macron into practice. But also the war in Ukraine makes these discussions more pressing and has put the word Zeitenwende, a new era or a historical turning point, on the German political agenda. There's a lot of negotiations going on, especially now in Elmau at the G7 summit, but also in Brussels and Strasbourg, and of course in the capital cities, Berlin and Paris. For us, it's now the right point in time to talk about the challenges that we're facing and to identify ways to move ahead. The topics that we will talk about today is security of energy supply in Europe, Franco-German initiatives for the strengthening of European sovereignty, and European security policy. I would like to wish all of us a good debate, and we'll give the floor to Michel Wichra, Sciences Po.
Guten Tag, bonjour à toutes et à tous, chère Cornelia. Je suis très heureux d'être avec vous aujourd'hui.
Good afternoon, dear Cornelia. I'm thrilled to be a part of this 3rd forum, Science Meets Politics, which has been hosted by the Hertie School and Sciences Po together since 2021. Unfortunately, I cannot be on site. However, I'm thrilled to be joining you online. Mr. Martin, Philippe Martin, the deacon of the economics department, is also a part of this panel. It's about strengthening Franco-German relations, but also it's about strengthening the development of the resilience package in the European Union. I'm thrilled to be organizing this together with Hertie School. It's a key partner for Sciences Po. Academically speaking, I can say that at the first two panels, we had very rich discussions and topics. On the first occasion, it was about the exchange programs for Erasmus students and other students, other exchange students, and we had a look at the ramifications of the COVID pandemic on these programs. On the second occasion, it was about the climate crisis, and now we are talking about European sovereignty. There is a multitude of dimensions we need to take into account: climate-related sovereignty, diplomatic sovereignty, looking at the war of aggression in Ukraine, but it's also about food and health sovereignty. We exchange with our partner, Hertie School, on a regular and close basis. Students of both institutions visit the partner institution. We funded the Henrik Enderlein Award, which is closely linked to this institution. Henrik Enderlein established Hertie School, and it is awarded in the French Federal Ministry for Foreign Affairs and European Affairs, which makes us strengthen the Franco-German engine. Today, scientists and politicians will engage in a dialogue. This is what we want to do, combining action and science and bringing politicians and scientists together. We have a number of speakers who will take on a Franco-German perspective, looking at all kinds of topics. It's about the Franco-German engine, really, and we will hear about all kinds of points of views in identifying solutions for this multifaceted crisis we're in. That's all I wanted to say. I would like to thank you for your participation and for the inspirational contributions we will be listening to.
Bonjour, bienvenue, merci d'être avec nous aujourd'hui. Dans ce premier panel.
Good afternoon, thank you and welcome for being here and participating in this first panel, which I will host. We will get into energy-related questions. My name is Cécile Boutelet. I'm an economics correspondent for Le Monde, for the newspaper Le Monde in Berlin. I focus on economics-related questions. This first panel, and this has been alluded to by Ms. Hassel, will focus on energy-related topics, which are rather pressing and urgent these days. If I look at the last few days, we can see that the Minister for Economic Affairs has invoked the second step of the gas contingency plan. After there were difficulties with security of supply, there was a decrease by 40% of gas supplies. And he alluded to the fact that we are entering a new difficult phase in gas supplies. So we need to make savings, and EDF, Total, and another French energy company called upon the population to save energy, because in winter we will be facing an energy crisis, which means that we need already to start saving energy. In Saint-Avold, a coal-fired power plant was launched In Germany, there's deliberations about whether or not we should reconnect nuclear power plants to the grid. So the question of energy security is very topical. It's about avoiding an energy crisis, but also social division. We want to talk about this topic with 3 speakers today, but before I introduce them, why don't we listen to Franziska Brantner for a little introduction? She's a parliamentary state secretary at the Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action. Chers amis, dear friends of the Franco-German exchange, I would very much like to be with you today. Unfortunately, I'm in Brussels, and I'm glad that I can still give a few answers, albeit digitally, to your questions, or at least once again present a few of our guiding principles. The question is, how can we reconcile reduced quantities of Russian gas, oil, and coal with social justice within Germany, the EU, but one might also say worldwide? This is quite a legitimate question, and I can start by saying that our principles, which we are guided by at the moment, are security of supply, of course, greater resilience, which is also part of it, and social justice, combined with ambitious climate protection goals. These are our guiding stars, and they are not always easy to put into practice. In the current situation, of course, we see that we always run into difficulties when it comes to gas, be it when prices go up or, quote unquote, when there is no gas at all. And then, of course, prices go up for the rest of the population, but there is also an actual scarcity of supply. In such situations, the question of distribution becomes very acute. To everything that becomes scarcer, that becomes more expensive, there's a dimension of distribution, and we have to address this both in national policy, but also at European and international policy level. That is our task, and we have to be aware of that. And we have to make sure that this war, the current situation, the changes that we have to address as a consequence do not cause inequality or even exacerbate it. That mustn't happen. So what will we do in the face of the unfortunately strong and stronger dependency in which we have gotten entangled? There are roughly 3 answers to this question. One is that if something becomes less or more, or becomes more expensive, you might also want to need less of it. So creating efficiencies, savings. That's a very big part of what we're trying right now with energy saving campaigns, energy efficient support, a whole plethora of actionable measures for private companies, so that we really make progress here and simply need less, and thus also have to import less. The second is using alternatives. For us, this means, first and foremost, the expansion of renewable energies. We need to really make rapid progress now, so that in the end, we will need to import less. But it's really heavily reliant on this expansion that I mentioned. But it won't be enough right away. That's why we also have to import gas from other countries. That is why we have also launched new LNG terminals. And in the long or medium term, green hydrogen will also be a part of the mix. So what are the alternatives to gas? We are now entering into partnerships. To that end, the advantage of green hydrogen is that it can be produced in a lot more countries than have natural gas reserves at hand. So firstly, savings, consuming less. Secondly, alternative resources with renewables as a priority, and then gas and green hydrogen. And thirdly, and this is also part of it, the question is, if in the end there is a delta between what we get and what we need, what happens then? We have a European legal basis for this that clearly states priorities given to citizens so that no one has to freeze during winter. The question then still arises, how will the rest of it be distributed? For industrial use, for example, but also what energy saving measures do citizens have to take so that we can get through these difficult times in good shape? We are working on this. It is not a trivial thing to do, but preparations are underway, not only nationally, by the way, but also at European level, because of course we really have to work together on this. That is the question of how we deal with this delta. And For me personally, it is very much part of this question that we ensure that there is relief for citizens who do not have a lot of money to spare, who perhaps just about manage to make ends meet with their salary today, and who, if energy prices keep soaring, will no longer be able to do so. In addition, we will probably have to think about what we might have to do in the autumn if the unfortunate situation should continue the way it has. But it is clear that we have a first relief package. The second one, if it should be necessary, must be socially balanced and focus on those who need it. We will not be able to offer the same level of relief to everyone. Another important point for Europe is the question that we also try to influence prices by jointly purchasing gas at the European level. This was already decided on at the summit of the heads of government, in abstract terms, that is. The implementation is not quite that trivial. The Commission is dealing with the issue, and hopefully the outcome will be good. In any case, we're open to it. The implementation, as I said, has to be fleshed out. Smart people are working on this right now. And last but not least, we must be careful not to lose this debate about the prerogative of interpretation of the war, that we ensure that the negative consequences of this war, unfortunately, not only in Ukraine, where they are at their worst, but also for us, much less dire, but still noticeable, are made clear at the end. Who is responsible for this? And that we always point out this logic and say, it was not Siemens who did not do a good job, but it was a clear decision on the Russian side, for example, to reduce the gas supply to Germany. That is a real conflict and could also be called a war, an economic war. But we have to communicate it as such, address it and prepare ourselves in these social public spaces to ensure that we do not disregard our own population. And an important element in doing this is social justice, meaning that everyone makes a contribution and that those who can contribute more also do so in these difficult times. That said, I'd like to wish you a good discussion. See you soon.
Eh bien, merci Madame Brantner. Je reprends donc le fil de cette modération. Madame Brantner donc l'a évoqué, nous sommes en guerre économique. C'est une situation qui
So Mrs. Brantner said that we are in an economic war. So we need to really foster resilience and social justice. These are two very important points that we will be broaching as well during our discussion. And I would like to welcome Monsieur Houben, who's member of the Bundestag, and he's the spokesperson for economic affairs of the Liberal Group. And he's also a member of the coalition, which is in power right now. Good day, Mr. Houben.
Ich habe den Eindruck, wir haben ein bisschen ein
Well, I have the impression that we seem to be having a technical hiccup. So thank you very much for your introduction. Thank you for inviting me to this event today. Could you please repeat your initial question? Unfortunately, it was not translated. I did not actually ask an initial question yet. I was just introducing you. Thank you very much for being here. Very warm welcome to you. Philippe Martin is also here. He's a professor at the Sciences Po. He's president of the French Economic Council. And he's actually the president, as I said. Hello, Mr. Martin. I'm very happy you're here. I'm pleased to be here. Hello. And Ms. Moritz Schularick, he's a professor at the Rheinische Friedrich Wilhelm University at Bonn. A very warm welcome. I hope he's here. You are right now at Sciences Po, is that correct? Yes. Yes, you're a professor at Sciences Po. Pardon me, I did write it down. There you go. So Mr. Martin is also a professor at Sciences Po. Too bad that Valérie cannot be here today, member of the European Parliament. Unfortunately, she cannot be here. So let's kick it off. I would like to first of all address our economists in the round, Monsieur Martin and Monsieur Schularick. So we have seen that the situation has worsened in the past week, and this might have dramatic impact on the budget. So from your point of view, how would you analyze the situation? Which risks do you see in the next months to come, and what are your recommendations? So, as I said, what are your recommendations for the political decision makers? Yes, I can kick it off. I can speak in either German, French, or English. Should I switch to English and might be easier for everyone?
Okay.
You can continue in English or in German as you like. You can continue in German and then we have English translation.
Ich denke, in der Tat sind die Entwicklungen jetzt der letzten Tage letzten Wochen sehr gravierend.
So most recently, we did observe quite dramatic implications, and this will have an impact in the next months to come. So I believe this has led to quite a shock right now. It has quite an impact on the economy. I believe this is why the prices kept skyrocketing, and this might lead to a lack of access to gas from Russia. And let me just point out that this is actually no surprise. In March, we published a study, and this one was heavily discussed. The study dealt with the German economy and how it would deal with a gas embargo, and this would lead to severe economic problems, and we indicated that there would be economic costs of 1 to 3%. So let's talk about the supply side. And Mrs. Brantner has already broached the subject. In terms of LNG terminals and other channels, we have actually advanced quite a lot, and we have made things possible that we did not imagine to be possible a couple of months ago. Our storages are fuller than they were before, and we have reached a normal level again. But we have also worked on the demand side. So we have appealed to our population to save energy.
Stärker in die Pflicht genommen, so schnell wie möglich.
So we also asked our industrial actors to switch to rather energy-saving procedures, but unfortunately, this did not go so well. I think the federal government really is to blame here, and so in my opinion, they were quite naive with regard to that, with regard to filling up our storage systems. So let me leave it at that pretty much. Thank you very much, Mr. Schularick. So maybe I'd like to address Mr. Martin now. You also published a study, a feasibility study in April, just like Mr. Schularick did. So according to you, what's your analysis with regard to the current situation? We can see that that France is also experiencing that energy crisis. So what do you think is going to happen in the next months to come?
Ce qui se passe sur les prix, qui sont en grande partie manipulés
Well, with regard to the prices, I believe they're just being manipulated by Russia.
La manière dont les sanctions énergétiques en Europe ont été mises en place est un échec. C'est un échec puisque d'un côté,
with regard to the current policies in Europe,
ressources financières pour la Russie,
I believe that they have failed.
Budgétaire pour la Russie les 4 premiers mois de 2022 par rapport aux 4 premiers mois de 2021. Et d'un autre côté, on voit
we have seen an increase of 34% in the first 4 months of 2022, pardon me, with regard to Russian gas, if we compare to the previous year.
the worst of two worlds. On a à la
Well, I
fois
believe we are actually helping Russia here.
coût économique pour l'Europe et d'un autre côté exactement l'inverse de ce qu'on voulait, c'est-à-dire
I believe we just achieved the opposite of what we actually wanted. So why are we actually in this situation right now? Well, I believe we have generated some sort of anticipation, but we did not act swiftly. And I believe that this is not the right way to take political measures. So we announced that we're going to have an embargo in about 6 months' time. So what's happening now is that we anticipate these economic disruptions in the future, and the market can react swiftly. And this is just happening with gas right now. We've seen it happening with oil before, but we've made an announcement, and Mr. Putin seems to have reacted swiftly because he's actually the one in control. So he's expecting a disruption with regard to gas. And we have come from 130 euro per megawatt hour to 150 euro per megawatt hour.
Relativement positive sur le fait qu'enfin on a une discussion sur
and
par
let me
exemple
point out that I'm rather confident that we have finally a discussion on a price cap
ça signifie
with regard to gas and regard to oil. I hope that we're going to talk about this in a minute as well. So finally, we're not in that passive situation anymore. Currently, we are very reactive or very passive. And it is just Putin who's making the decisions. And he's deciding on how to interrupt gas supplies and oil supplies. And he's making up the prices.
Sans en avoir le bénéfice qui serait de réduire les ressources financières à la Russie. Mais si je veux essayer de voir le verre à moitié plein.
So I believe that the sanctions that were imposed are not successful. I believe they have failed. But let's take a look at the upside here, the G7 summit that is currently taking place, as well as the endeavors with regard to a price cap for gas. I believe that this goes to show that we not just have to talk the talk, but we also have to walk the walk.
Et stratégique.
So it shouldn't be us who are suffering from the sanctions that were being imposed. Thank you very much, Mr. Martin. Thank you for your answer.
Son avis m'intéresse. Monsieur Houben,
I hope that Mr. Houben heard the translation of your answer because I'm very interested in his reaction.
Yeah.
It just seems to be a different kind of perspective. Yes, I would like to get your opinion on that. I don't agree with my previous speakers, actually. So with regard to the coalition that is currently in power in Germany, they had to actually throw overboard their convictions they have held for many decades. And they consider them to be appropriate and right. Let me just give you an example for that. No delivery of arms to war areas. Secondly, they have the conviction of phasing out of coal-powered plants as well as coal in general. Thirdly, they have the conviction to not use LNG terminals on the German coast. So within just weeks' time, we saw that there was a great change. I strongly believe that we should see the current development in the debate right now. This was also said during the introduction. It's all about the sovereignty of Europe. So in terms of the energy supply as well as the commodity supply, we can see that Europe is not yet sovereign or independent. We heavily depend on supplies and from other countries.
Wandel durch Handel, also wenn man
So for a very long time, Germans believed that change can only be achieved by trade. So they believed if they held positive economic ties with Russia, this would lead to a change of policy in Russia. And now we found out that this was actually a misjudgment. Now we have changed our political course. And let's break it down, we can see that the energy prices in coal or that we have coal and oil have increased heavily, but we have also made great changes and strides. So at the end of the year, we're not going to buy any Russian coal or oil anymore from Russia. So we can still see that gas supply is a weakness here, and we are still buying time with the current measures we have taken. So crude oil is a product that can be found on the world market. The price is made up of different elements. If we were able to convince OPEC Plus to increase their volumes, the crude oil price would go down. And then in turn, we would not have the current price problem. I hope you're very well aware of the fact that the gas price in Germany is actually in a correlation with the crude oil price. And this, in order to have an impact on the natural gas price, we would have to take a look at the old contracts. Russia is currently not delivering the natural gas for prices that were actually stipulated in the old contracts, and so they're not corresponding to the spot market prices. I believe in the past months we have achieved a lot, and we're currently looking for alternatives. In my opinion, we should be exploring different options in Germany. Maybe we should be exploiting our own resources. We have a gas field right at the border between the Netherlands and Germany, and for ecological reasons, they were not supposed to be exploited, but now the government of the federated state of Saxony, or pardon me, of Lower Saxony is changing its course, and the exploitation of shale gas was also banned in Germany. And right now we're kicking off a new debate on that. And for quite some time, we have led a debate on the 3 nuclear power plants that were actually supposed to be decommissioned, but we are thinking about expanding their lifespan. But that's a rather difficult question because the necessary material to do so cannot be found on a regular shelf in the supermarket. The uranium that is used in Germany is mostly from Kazakhstan and Russia. So we would create new dependencies by expanding the lifespan of these nuclear power plants. That leads to a new debate. So in terms of energy supply, we are actually acting. We also have another problem in Europe. And in my opinion, in France, 50% of the nuclear power plants are not running because they are not able to supply energy, which has to do with cooling water. So because of internal problems, we are facing even more pressure. Last but not least, let me address the question of how to address the current prices. So as an economist, I adopt the following perspective. The price motivates us to change our behavior, and this actually applies to the industry first. In the past months, I talked to different actors from the industry, and they told me that this led to quite a debate already. Right now, they are making great investments that we would have not had made otherwise, because it would not have paid off because the gas price was too low in the past. Due to the fact that the price was so low, it did not pay off to change our behavior. So as I said, we are leading that debate currently. But let's face the reality, we cannot set up a gas pipeline in 3 weeks' time, and we cannot switch our industry within a couple of months or weeks. And I believe that's the greatest challenge we're facing right now. So in terms of supply, we need to be able to gain more time. We are the ones who are dependent. We are the ones who are pressured. So that makes it even harder for us. Thank you very much, Mr. Houben. Thank you for analysis. I would like to continue with Mr. Schularick. You have published a study at the end of March, and you talked about an immediate gas embargo and which impact it would have. And we might be able to avoid certain negative implications that Mr. Martin has talked about earlier on. So tell me about the measures that should have been taken. And let's talk about the resilience of our industry as well. So what's your opinion on the current situation right now?
Ich denke, das ist in der Tat ein komplexes Feld.
Well, this is a very complex debate. Let me react to Mr. Houben's input. I believe he rejected many of our core insights from March. When I was listening to Mr. Houben, I was just wondering, so why is it so clear for him that certain industry actors cannot switch their energy sources within a couple of months or weeks? Because from a scientific point of view, this is possible. I believe this has to do with resilience. We have seen this in the past months in Germany. The lobby groups have had a great impact on the industry with regard to this energy question. The Federal Association of Industry, as well as unions, if they are not helping us, they're just blocking our country. The industry is actually making up 20% of the German economy, and unfortunately, those two actors have now worked together. And they used to block a dependency of Russian gas in the past, and I believe they should have started working on that earlier on. So in the past, we observed rather problematic opinions on the energy supply, and we have made strategic errors by creating this great energy dependency on a country that we cannot control anymore. And obviously, Russia is pursuing other interests that are very different from ours. So our resilience is rather problematic here. It takes us too much time to actually make decisions. And there are certain lobby groups that have great influence on the political decision makers, which is a problem. And there's something else that was being said. Certain groups do not foster resilience, but they rather make us even more vulnerable. And there was something that Philippe said, which I would like to support. I mean, announcing an embargo right now and implementing it in 6 months is quite a beginner's mistake, because this actually plays into the hands of Putin, and he has more leverage than we do, and he can react quite swiftly. So we are not achieving what our goal was meant to achieve. So we're not ending this war. Robert Habeck, the German economic minister, actually did an excellent job with regard to the supply side. But in terms of the economy policy side, we have made a great mistake. We have introduced a discount on gas or for cars here, and which led to the opposite of what we tried to achieve. And in the past, when we were still in power, when we were still able to set strong symbols against Putin, we did not act quick enough. So this means that right now we are still in that catch-22 with Putin, and Putin has greater leverage right now. So I believe that resilience is something that we are striving for also in other areas in Europe. I can not speak on behalf of France, but at least in Germany, our industry is not set up for resilience. As we've heard it, in 3 to 4 months, we managed to achieve a lot of things. Many of these things were made public within 3 to 4 days, but it just takes a really long time until certain policies are being implemented. Sometimes I believe there's a lot of red tape in German policy, but there is no will to actually act. So in this situation of crisis, we need the right kind of leadership. I'm not just addressing Mr. Houben now, I'm also addressing the federal government right now. So I believe there was a lack of the right kind of leadership and the understanding of taking the right risks in order to avoid greater risks that might appear later on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schularick. I would like to ask Mr. Martin whether he agrees that policymakers have been too tentative in France. Also, when it comes to bringing prices down for petrol, this didn't cause demand for Russian gas to decrease. When it comes to resilience, the Yellow Vest movement in France also comes to mind. It was a French trauma, or a trauma for the French government, because they didn't want to make the same experience in the run-up to the elections. What has been happening in terms of energy policy in France in the last few months?
C'est pas seulement en France, je crois qu'il est aussi en Allemagne. Je pense que l'Allemagne
The trauma of the Yellow Vest movement didn't really happen in France, but rather in Germany. I don't know if Germany learned good or bad lessons from this experience in Europe, but the movement did influence other countries. Working with pricing, is this a tool that we need to keep using? Yes, we need to work with gas prices in Europe. This is the best signal. Having high gas prices is the best signal for bringing consumption down and for decreasing our reliance on Russia and its energy market. It's also a good preparation for the energy transition. We need to try to put to reconcile our midterm and our long-term energy goals. The problem is that the yield generated with these high prices ends up in Russia, whereas it is supposed to end up in Europe. We can use different kinds of instruments, such as a price cap. This would enable us to benefit from the price yields. We could also tax energy imports from Russia.
Rebates sur les prix qu'on a vu en France.
So that would be called rebate. It was introduced in France and in other European countries. These price cuts are not the right tool, in my point of view. We need targeted transfers for budgets that are most severely affected by the increase of energy prices. But this is not always possible. It's about households with low income. Within these households, we have a very heterogeneous situation. It's a matter of what appliances these households have, whether they have a car, whether the people living in these households need to go to work by car, what do they use for heating. And if we have these targeted transfers, they are less cost intensive. They also entail lower bias as long as there is a price signal. But the problem is that they are not that easily implemented. You can initiate a targeted transfer for people using their car every day or who use oil for heating. But when it becomes complicated in legislative terms, we want to introduce a law in France dealing with purchasing power. We see that we need targeted measures. We could be talking about a premium or a lowering of value-added tax or another kind of tax. Can everybody hear me? Yes. So, Mr. Houben, you talked about the package of measures in Germany. You also were part of the process. It's about, well, it includes 30 million euros on the lowering of fuel prices, which was discussed rather controversially. We see that the situation is running a risk of deteriorating and staying with us for a while. What's your perspective looking at the next few months? What kind of measures are being prepared, and can this approach by the federal government be successful in this situation? We have answers for your questions, but Mr. Schularick, maybe I can get back to what you said. First of all, you need to make up your mind whether you want to praise Mr. Habeck or whether you want to criticize the federal government because it all takes so long. The legislation we adopted in the energy field all come from the Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action. So either it's good politics, good policies that we adopt in the federal government or not. The second comment, when it comes to gas consumption, there needs to be a distinction needs to be made. Sometimes gas is used as a resource. AdBlue, for example, is used based on natural gas. If you don't have natural gas, you cannot produce AdBlue. And the big problem is the issue of heat supply for industry. It's not possible without major investment. For example, if you have a steelwork, switching steelwork from gas to electricity is a major undertaking. It takes 2 to 3 years. So you might say that it all takes too long, but it's just not possible to speed up the process. We have a multitude of relief measures which were adopted in spring already. These include tax relief. There were all kinds of allowances that were expanded, for example, for commuters. There's an energy allowance for all employees required to pay social security contributions. There's an allowance for children, for people receiving tax-based unemployment benefits, and we abolished the renewable energy reallocation, but it will only take effect on the 1st of July this year. Also, and that seems to be something that you're interested in discussing, we introduced the €9 ticket for public transportation, and we introduced a petrol discount. At the moment, we are witnessing that the €9 ticket has caused a veritable run on public transportation. It also goes to show what kind of investment we need to make in the future if we really want to move people from using their cars to public transportation. This was a very good measure to be as a start. It will be running for 3 months, and then we will need to find out how we can introduce more sustainable or durable measures in public transportation, but this is also a difficult issue because we also will need to talk about, certain fee-based limits. So examples from Austria might also be good. Mr. Houben, due to the fact that we need to pay attention to time, I want to ask you, in the next few months, if we look at financing, will it be difficult to comply with the debt ceiling when we look at the budget for 2023? Well, the debt ceiling is enshrined in the Constitution and the Basic Law. The budgetary negotiations are still ongoing. The draft budget will need to be submitted by the end of the week, and I suppose that the debt ceiling will be complied with. We cannot always water down our budgetary policy due to external influence, because the danger is, we are rightly worried about inflation and increasing prices. I would like to remind you that inflation in Germany started shortly after the general election last year. From my background in economics, which is copper, the prices started rising last summer. We didn't know anything about the conflict in Ukraine then, but what we need to do in Germany in the future is a solid budgetary policy, because it also influenced the situation of the euro, the standing of the euro as opposed to the dollar and other currencies, and it also greatly influences the options for refinancing. You need to take into account that last year in the federal budget, we had to pay 2 billion euros for debt fulfillment. It will be 28 million more in the next budget. We need to comply with the debt ceiling in the future. The last thing I would like to mention before we take questions from the audience is the question of communication.
Nous avons actuellement, côté allemand, une communication très précise du ministère Abeck sur
the communication in Germany is very clear in terms of the scope of the crisis, and there is a communication campaign targeted at energy-saving measures. Mr. Schularick, you mentioned that this communication is insufficient, but in France there is no such communication to speak of. To what extent can communication influence the point of view or the stance of citizens? And generally speaking, what are the ways in which citizens can be convinced of consuming less energy?
Notamment ce qu'on a entendu chez Frau Brantner. Quel est votre avis là-dessus, Monsieur Schularick? Et ensuite,
this is something that Ms. Brantner also alluded to. It's very topical in Germany. So this is a question first for Mr. Schularick and then for the other panelists. Mr. Houben started going down a new kind of road. There are two possibilities, one of which is introducing economic incentives for making people save energy. Most economists would agree with this approach because it creates a situation in which those who need gas, for example, for producing AdBlue, you are willing to pay a higher price for those, whereas a different business in a different kind of industry might have the option to reduce their opening hours in order to reduce the heating required. So there are opportunities on the demand side, which are primarily price-driven. The problem is that you need to make a social balancing. one of the best approaches is basing this on the energy consumption. Before the crisis started, and launching or introducing an energy allowance for socially less favored families. We have overall costs of the economy, and if we go back to the macro level and remind ourselves of what we wanted in February or March, back then, what we wanted was keeping costs for the German economy low. We didn't want to have a recession. We were talking about only doing things that will create a greater damage for Putin than for us. So we wanted to keep economic costs for us low, and we wanted to cripple Putin's war machinery and the Russian economy. Now we have to confess or admit after 3 or 4 months that we haven't been successful in doing either. We have a lot of economic costs. We have high inflation. We will probably enter into a recession, and we wired 6 times the amount of Russian energy prices to Russia. So we need to make a distinction. We haven't done enough in Germany because we were afraid of the cost, and now we are getting the bill. We have costs on the economic side. We kept funding Putin, and the only one who's happy about this is sitting in the Kremlin. Of course, we can make savings, and behavioral economists will agree that this is a good idea. If there's agreement about the whole concept, people will also comply. The combination of higher incentives, they need to be based on prices, and appeals and concepts of behavioral economy can make citizens save energy. This can all work together. But as I said, petrol discounts and so on
mit dem Hinterteil wieder umgeworfen, weil wir uns vor den
something that was totally ineffective because we were afraid of the political ramifications. The yellow vest phobia was really present still. So I wouldn't really say that the traffic light condition did such a good job. Mr. Martin, when it comes to communication, how do we communicate to consumers that they need to cut back on their consumption, even in a society which is rather divided, as we saw in the context of the general elections in France? How can this be successful? Well, it's really difficult to have a good political communication that convinces people to consume less energy. Bruno Le Maire tried to do it, tried to accomplish it with 2 communication campaigns that he launched, but reactions in social media were really devastating and insufficient. We still remember vividly the situation of the Yellow Vest movement. A communication could have been successful if it had taken place directly after the invasion happened. That is, at a point in time when the public opinion in France, but also all over Europe, was very much characterized by the shock of the Russian invasion in Ukraine. We could have sent out a clear political message that we now need to save energy, that it's essential to do that. But this didn't happen, and now it's a really difficult thing to do. Because now in the public opinion,
est devenue la question politique
the topic
essentielle dans le débat.
didn't really receive that kind of attention that would have been needed. And it no longer happens that much in the French Europe public sphere. There are two instruments that were mentioned, the price as an instrument,
Maintenant,
but at some point,
sur les quantités et sur les prix. C'est ça, je pense que c'est ça le problème, c'est que nous sommes très passifs.
Putin will dictate prices. They will force certain measures upon us.
Je crains qu'elle ne se fasse par un mécanisme qui est très peu efficace en économie.
The
C'est le
savings that might be made
ça paraît évident. Alors en Allemagne, il y a déjà des
will
discussions
happen
sur un
by
protocole.
means of another possibility or approach, that is rationing, that is reducing quantities.
Un message politique très fort. Et puis ensuite,
at the beginning of the crisis, we didn't communicate clearly. We missed out on this chance, on this opportunity. And when it comes to pricing, we decided not to really use this tool in a real way.
En considérant que le marché du gaz et du pétrole aujourd'hui, c'est pas
successful in bringing revenue for Russia down either. To the contrary,
l'Europe reprenne du pouvoir
the
de
market
marché.
is being manipulated by Putin. He has a monopoly going for him. So Europe needs to reconquer influence and power. The prices need to stay high for the consumption to decrease.
Merci beaucoup,
But
Monsieur Martin. Je crois que ça
the revenue should be transferred from the Russian side to Europe. Thank you very much. This is an answer to the question by Ms. Reganova, who asked in what way Russia can be pressured to bring prices down, because Russia is in a position of monopoly. But something to add about this topic. There's also a legal side of the whole story. The contracts with Russia are long-term contracts, take or pay contracts, that's what they're called. If we want to abide by these contracts, we are required to buy certain quantities. We can't just decrease these quantities.
On ne peut pas dire, par exemple, aujourd'hui, eh bien, le prix ne pourra pas aller au-delà. On peut réguler ce prix et dire ce prix ne pourra pas aller.
There's nothing in these contracts that allows us
simplement dire dans le
not to increase these prices over a certain threshold of 120 euros per megawatt hour.
Une part du prix très élevé, c'est le fait qu'on anticipe dans le futur que les prix seront plus élevés.
Or rather, we need to look ahead. We need to be visionary also when it comes to our pricing policy. And the price cap
en général,
is an instrument
totalement anormal et totalement hétérodoxe.
That might be unusual, but we are in an unusual situation after all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Houben. I think we're almost at the end of our discussion. Maybe you can also comment on that question of the communication, and please also address the question about the public. Could nuclear energy be the answer to reduce dependency on Russian gas? I know it's a very complicated question to ask to solve the problem in the short run. So there are two questions I'd like to ask you about the communication, maybe, and the second question. So we have about 2 to 3 minutes time so that we can actually stick to our time schedule. Thank you very much. Thank you. I try to really be concise in my answer. I believe our political decision makers made it clear that we have quite a severe energy supply situation right now. There was a newspaper article that said Mr. Habeck, our economy minister has already held his blood and tears speech, just like Churchill did. I believe everybody needs to be aware of the fact that the situation is quite severe right now. And Mr. Schularick, I'd like to ask you to take a look at the official web pages of our Federal Network Agency. Then you will notice that in Germany, we have consumed less gas on a monthly basis. If you compare to last year, there was a reduction of 20%. And in June, I think we have a saving of about 40 to 50% of gas with respect to last year. So I believe everybody has understood the problem. Everyone tries to save heating energy. So if we talk about us funding the Russian war machine, let me just point out the following. Russia is buying its weapon in Russia only. So Putin does not depend on revenues in dollars or euros. These are internal market products. So this adds a new dimension to that. So if you read about insolvency of Russia right now, because Russia might not be able to meet certain requirements, I believe we should actually wait a couple of weeks longer. In terms of nuclear power, it's a very difficult solution. But if we manage to not burn gas anymore for our electricity generation, that would be a huge stride for us. It would help us out enormously. But in terms, yes, as I said, in terms of our approval procedures, this might be possible, but this might be very difficult to make sure to cover our energy generation with uranium, and I don't think it's going to help us out this winter. It might help us for next winter. The discount on fuel does help, and we will see whether the cooperation between Netherlands, Luxembourg, and France we might be able to actually refinance the tax revenues that we're missing now with other revenues that we might have at the end of the day. I would like to comment on something that was being said. 40% of the Russian budget depend on the export of Russian gas and oil. So in order to keep the stability of the Russian government, in order to make sure he can actually pay all of the public services, police forces, nurses, etc., he actually needs to keep a stable budget. And the economists did a great job in the past months. I believe we have made advances, and I believe it's important to acknowledge them as well. So in order to end this very fruitful discussion, I would like to ask the three of you to answer another question. Maybe you can sum it up in a couple of words. Which German-French project would you launch to face these problems? Or which Franco-German project would you support to tackle this problem? I know it's a very difficult question, but I mean, the floor is yours. Let your imagination run wild. Okay, I'm going to kick it off. Where there are two major projects where we have to make advances. It's about the defense capacities and our energy market. These are great big weak points. I'm not a military expert, but I'm quite concerned right now. We have 27 individual armament projects, and in the end we have 27 different rearmed forces with different administrative structures respectively. So this would not actually make sense. France has a working army, so they're spending, so they're actually not spending more than we do, and we have a very poor army, so I don't know what our problem is actually. So we need to make a strategic, urgent update in Europe. We don't know what's going to happen in 2024 in the United States. Who is going to be president in 24? I believe we have to make progress on this point. We have to make joint progress on the army issue. Maybe this might happen under the French presidency, and maybe Germany would be funding it. Could be a solution. But let's not have 27 isolated small armies that will not be able to achieve a lot on their own. So we need a modernization of the European army. And in terms of energy, we also need to find a joint approach. I think that became quite clear. Thank you very much, Mr. Martin. Can you think of a German-French project that you would like to support in order to face this challenge? Well, I believe we need to think about an embargo, rationing of energy, and we also need to have a Franco-German strategy. So in order to mitigate the economic impact of the import or reduced impact of Russian gas.
En coopération entre, en particulier la France et
we are not very well prepared, we will not be able to mitigate the impact. And in order to answer or to solve that problem, we need a good French-German cooperation, and we need to find a European solution to that. So we have to talk about so-called rationing protocols. These protocols need to be implemented by every country, by companies, and we have to have an exchange on that issue. We need some sense of solidarity between those countries who are hit hardest and those who were hit less. And I believe that France is not hit as hard, just like Spain. So we need a new sense of solidarity.
Sur les mécanismes
and we also need to support the Eastern European countries who are also going to be hit harder than we might be hit. So we need to introduce mechanisms for solidarity and mechanisms for integration. We are going to be facing a shock in the foreseeable future, and we need a deeper cooperation between France and Germany, and we need a European cooperation, economically speaking and technically speaking. Mr. Houben, the floor is yours. So in terms of the German-French cooperation, what do you think about that?
Unsere Gasspeicher möglichst stark zu füllen, weil daraus ja auch heraus eine europäische Gesamtverantwortung entsteht. Wir sind ja in Europa.
Okay, so we are just filling up a reservoir here in Germany, and this is very important. And in Europe, we are able to store gas, and we need to support those countries who are not capable of storing enough gas. So we really need to fill up our gas reservoirs, our gas storages, and that's not just a German, but a European endeavor. And in terms of the Franco-German cooperation, I'm hoping for an improvement in terms of the electricity grid. We should connect our electricity grids. So whenever we have a lack of electricity, we can support each other. There will be a gas pipeline that will go up to Spain, and we might be able to include that gas pipeline into a European network, but we would have to actually build it across the mountains, the Pyrenees. So I would love to see this kind of debate. I would love to see this overarching aim of transporting gas from North Africa via Central Europe. Thank you very much for your contributions. So we're coming to an end of this panel. Stay tuned, because in about 10 minutes time, or less than 10 minutes, we will have the next panel that is coming up. Cornelia Woll, Helen Kohl, Christian de Ken, and Frédéric Petit. They are going to speak about the French-German cooperation in order to foster European sovereignty. Thank you for your contributions, and see you soon for our next panel.
Dankeschön. Tschüss.
Merci.
Merci.